What's up, everybody? My name is Danny Ladd. I am a librarian here at the Santa Clara City Library, and thank you for joining us this evening as we talk about the late, great James Dilla, J Dilla, JD, John Doe, aka etc., etc., etc. We're here with the author Dan Charnas with his book Dilla Time, and I'm just excited to also have my friend journalist David Ma joining us in this banter as we talk about Dilla, his life, the book, and also just his influence in the world of hip hop and music in general. So I like to read some bios. Sorry, these are bios that you guys wrote, so I did my best to edit it as short as possible.
God.
I know. Dan Charnas is an award-winning music and business journalist, producer of records and television, and professor. Recipient of the 2007 Pulitzer Fellowship of Arts Journalism. He is the author of 4 books: Def Jam, The First 25 Years of the Last Great Record Label, The Big Payback, The History of the Business of Hip Hop, Work Clean, The Life-Changing Power of Mise en Place to Organize Your Life, Work and Mind, and of course, Dilla Time. He is an associate arts professor at the Clive David Institute of Recorded Music at New York University. He's been a contributor to NPR, Billboard, the Washington Post, and his writing has appeared in the Financial Times, Chicago Tribune, Complex, Village Voice, Spin, and many more. And I know there is many more. David Ma has a similar bio as well. He's a writer, editor, and journalist whose work has appeared in publications like Wax Poetics, The Guardian, Billboard, Rolling Stone, The Paris Review, NPR, Vibe, Fader, Pitchfork, Accelerator, Ego Trip, Q Point, The Sounds of Mercury News, and so on and so forth. He is the founder of the audio blog nerdtorious.com and is 1/3 of the Dad Bod Rap Pod, a hip hop discussion podcast based out of San Jose, California. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining me today. And as we talk about Dilla Time and Dilla. But before we jump into our discussion, I wanted to ask both of you, seeing that this might fall into your professional purview, how has the landscape of hip hop academic teaching, writing, and publishing changed over this decade? I only ask because as the culture and the people who are the purveyors of the culture are aging, and they're starting to document and archive their work for publication, or in films and documentaries. Has there been a lot of change in the last decade plus, or or is this like still subtle shifts?
Oof, there's a lot there going on there.
David, how long have you been teaching?
2 semesters at the university level, so I'm very new to this.
All right. Well, I've been teaching, I guess, for about 9 years now.
Okay.
But I have to say that I am not, like, number one, I'm not in the hip hop teaching sort of vein, right? Which I think was pioneered by, let's say, like people like Trisha Rose, Martha Diaz, as a whole thing about sort of hip hop studies. I think Marcelina Morgan and at Harvard, like there is a definitely a lane of teaching about hip hop, and then this idea of hip hop studies. Can't forget my man Emery Petschauer, out there in Michigan. And I am a journalist by trade and education. My academic discipline is actually African American and urban studies. So I am coming at hip hop in an academic sense from more of the social sciences, those social sciences. So I do know that it's gotten broader and it's penetrated more into academia.
Yeah.
But I also, for me, there's always been a bit of I don't know if tension is the right word, but there is a particular academic way of looking at hip hop that I felt was somewhat too theoretical and thus tropey.
Yeah.
And it's one of the reasons that I wrote The Big Payback over 11 years ago, 2010. Jesus. It's coming up on 12 years now. one of the reasons I wrote it is that the way that people wrote about hip hop and languaged hip hop was super tropey. What do I mean by that? I mean, like, especially with regard to how things became what they were.
Mm-hmm.
An artist like Run DMC springs almost fully formed into existence as a dynamic force, and if something bad happened to them, it happened because of the industry. There'd be a lot of that, like, well, the industry and executives, but zero inquiry into that part of it. No intellectual curiosity, no academic curiosity about how the business actually works. A lot of theories, right? A lot of theories about appropriation, a lot of theories about race, a lot of all that stuff, which is true, but it did not delve into that area at all. So that's one of the reasons that I wrote The Big Payback as a work of journalism. I was curious about how everything sort of fit together, and it doesn't fit together in nice, neat little grad school narratives. I know that's kind of a long-winded answer to your question. But
No, I think you definitely touched upon why, because I say back in the day, or for inquiring minds, reading publications like The Source, or if you're intrigued about the industry and what's going on, you have to purchase these magazines, monthly publications. But as the shift has pushed the early 2000s to the internet, where everybody could blog and write what they wish about the industry, you had more quantity than quality. So what for you writing that book in expanding upon the business of hip hop, or just the business of the industry in general, do you feel, I mean, for both of you, that long form writing and writing books like this is important for the culture, especially Black entertainment and culture as it stands? Because there's not a lot of books, but I'm starting to see it. I just purchased a DJ Screw book that just got published. It's amazing. It's just cool. I've seen this in the UK, where the coverage of reggae and drum and bass is more extensive, and grime. But right now I'm starting to see that happen here in America, and to the people who pervade the scenes and the movements even further.
We've talked about this before on the podcast, but like, you walk into a Barnes and Nobles, and there's 50 Louis Armstrong books, or there's 50 John Coltrane books, and there's like a pamphlet on Kendrick, and it's like, so it's really nice to see.
Or an autobiography, right? A mass market autobiography, ghost written by what's his face, Adam Bradley.
So something like Dilla Time, to have a long form, in depth book be well received, it's like, finally, and like us as music fans and enthusiasts, like, this is what we hunger for. But it's really nice to see the just everything come to fruition, and it's like, we told you so. Like, this is the book that we wanted, and it's nice to see it being accepted on a wider level. So again, props to you, Dan, because it's like, this is what we're here for. But to us, sometimes it feels niche, even though Dilla is a god. Like, I mean, you mentioned at the start of the book, I mean, some people refer to him as that, and it's like, oh, this is the first real book on God, like a musical god.
Oh my God.
I mean, it's true, because this book confirms everything we loved about his music and his his story, but also
that he's not a god. Let's emphasize that.
That's what I'm saying. Like, you humanized it.
You humanized it in the storytelling, because it's an enormous undertaking. I can't believe you did it. So why'd you do it? I know you alluded to it in the book. I ask myself
that question.
Yeah, why'd you do it? Because
every day. No, listen. To do a book like this, you have to be either crazy or angry, and I guess I'm both. There's compulsion that started very slowly. How did it start? Well, I mean, it started with my fandom of JD, which led to me working with him in 1999 when Chino XL and I This is when I was in the music business. When Chino
Mhm.
XL and I went out to Detroit, both of our first times in Detroit, to work with JD, do a couple of tracks. To me sort of really beginning to understand after that how his rhythmic sense worked mechanically, and then hearing it just start to happen on, oh, there it is on Talib Kweli. Oh, Music Soul Child's using it. Oh, Dark Child's using it. Oh, wow, Michael Jackson, Floetry, all of his his rhythmic sense was really moving outward. It wasn't until I started writing The Big Payback that I just began a ritual of listening to Dilla instrumentals, because I just needed something to write to, and that is when the repetition really began to move that stuff into my brain. Then I began teaching. The next level was my students, 18, 19, 20 years old, love Dilla. I'm like, how you even know Dilla?
Yeah.
Like, you weren't even alive when, Slum was out. What's going on? To then me teaching a class on Dilla at NYU, which then helped me see that there was nothing really musically correct for people to read about Dilla. That there was one thing that he had done that was so much bigger than anything that had ever been written about him, and nobody was putting their finger on it. And that made me angry. It made me angry, and I was just crazy enough to think that I could write a little science book about the music of Dilla. And then the crazy part of me forgot that once I start reporting, meaning talking to people, I can't stop. So then it went like this, and it became a biography of Dilla, as well as a biography of his musical sense, as well as a biography of American and of, basically rhythm, and a biography of Detroit. So crazy, angry, nutty, 5 years later, boom, book.
That's awesome.
Yeah, we're gonna say thank you once again for your madness, because it makes sense. Now, as you talk about expanding upon, especially in the book, you put out a lot of detailed notes on the musicality and the musicology of the history of American music, those the Black American experience in the rhythms, but also Dilla's ability to shift his timing, and as you call it, Dilla Time. Now, if I listened to the audiobook version of this too, so gratefully I could hear what you were explaining at the same time in those charts. But if nobody's a musician and they don't understand what you're trying to explain, it could just look like something, like grids and everything. But if you were to have taken that out, would have it not made your book as powerful to explain Dilla's story and what he did for music?
Meaning take the grids out?
Yeah, what if that was not explained? Yes. What if you did not take their time to explain those important aspects of,
I wouldn't have done it, because that was the whole point of doing it. And I was, assisted in that endeavor. The visual language, the grids, are adapted from my colleague, Jeff Parrott. So that's how he teaches rhythm, with those grids. Before, when I was talking about Dilla Time, I was using some weird old vibrating squares, like, to show the conflict. But, so that really helped. And the only reason to do it, listen, what's lacking in our music journalism is music. An understanding of music. Our music journalism has become celebrity journalism. It's all about personality, very little about, like, all these things written about Beyonce, right? Beyonce, what would you write if you write, oh, how she's a great businesswoman, or oh, how she rolls out a release of something, but nothing about how Beyonce really transformed R&B singing with her cadences, right? Like, that's music. That's the music in music journalism, and that's really important, that we are able, as journalists and academics, to language that stuff.
I mean, that's sort of what I think stood out to me with the book. I mean, one of the biggest takeaways is that, you know, I think we mentioned this on the podcast again, that it's 2 tracks, right? It's socio-historical biography stuff, and then it's all the musicologist stuff. And you know, and even some of those charts are over my head, and like
Really? You're a smart dude.
Like,
which one is over your head? We'll go over it right now.
After class,
we will explain it.
No, because I mean, you know, like you know, with us being music dudes, you know, we say like pocket and swing and things like that, but some of that stuff is just over my head. So to have it laid out, I thought was just a very thoughtful approach, and given that, it gives everybody different entry points, you know, for the book, and that was a big takeaway that I appreciated.
That's great.
And so I'm going to ask a question that maybe is just, you know, for anybody who's not familiar with J Dilla and his importance. So this is for you, Dan. It's like, you know, what was important about Dilla's ability to listen to music and his production acumen that, you know, has definitely changed the way, since he started producing music, the way the industry has worked. And you touched upon that earlier, because I do remember when the Beat Generation series came out with Baby E, and I was listening to Jazzy Jeff's, and you talked about Jazzy Jeff in the book, and I listened to his album. I was like, how come it sounds like Dilla's album? You know, but I didn't have those connections in the scene, understanding the proximity they knew each other, you know?
Yeah.
And but it was always different, from Lab Cabin, California, and then me listening to Beats Rhyme is Life. I was like, why is this, you know, I didn't understand as a young teen what this was about. Why is it so different in my ear? But now it's everywhere, basically everywhere. So, but why is it important? Why is Dilla's music important?
Okay, well, I mean, for 2 different reasons, right? And there's the mystical attraction that we have for him, the sort of spiritual side of Dilla, the cult of Dilla, and that, you know, I think that also didn't have a lot of great explanation as to why, you know, what was behind it. What I wanted to do was explain the science of Dilla, but I also, the more that I do this, the more I realize, oh, you know, that mystical side is it needs an explainer too. You know what I mean?
Right.
So I think, just in terms of the science of Dilla, why he has this kind of persistence in the music world and among musicians, even those who don't know how to language exactly what he did, right? They say Dilla feel, Dilla swing. What they're really talking about is what I call Dilla Time, which is a third time feel, in addition to the 2 general time feels that we've had in popular music since the beginning of the 20th century. So what are those, right? The first time feel is straight rhythms, even, an even pulse. We know what that sounds like. And then with the advent of African-American music and artists like Louis Armstrong, instead of even beats, we had the option to do uneven beats. You know what that sounds like. And so there's been this continuum, straight to swing, that we've had in our music all along. But in 1998, on a drum machine in a basement in Detroit, what J Dilla was able to do is slam those 2 time feels together, putting straight and swung song elements in deliberate conflict with each other. And that's literally how it works on the drum machine, right? It's not about septuplet swing. It's not about all these other things that they talk about on YouTube. It's not the midpoint between straight and swung. It's literally slamming these 2 kinds of feels together. And that's Dilla Time. And that's the thing that programmers do when they emulate it. And that's the thing that musicians also try to emulate. And that's hugely important. That is an important musical development, a development in music theory, right? Of what I call centenary proportions. of a cycle of 100 years, that kind of invention. Hard to believe that a beat maker in Detroit in a basement on a drum machine, somebody who, you know, didn't call himself a musician really, could have that much influence. But that's what makes his story so amazing to me.
Yeah.
That's what makes him so important. I just hope that people now see, oh yeah, he did do that, didn't he?
Well, Dan, I mean, to your credit, I mean, in the book, it gives us the vocabulary and the tools to sort of understand what makes Dilla great. You know what I mean? And
Thank
even
you.
some of the stuff you were saying at the beginning, it's like, oh, well, you know, I would call it a Dilla swing too, shit, you know? But I really like how you challenge some of the cliches, you know, regarding Dilla's, you know, mythology and all that. But, you know, on another note, certainly, like I said, just help. It's like a gradual understanding, the way you laid everything out, you know. So I really appreciated that, and just wanted to add that.
Thanks, man. Thank you.
With the you know, the telling that you've created, and because of Dilla's, you know, closeness to, you know, his own crew, Slum Village, and Fiddler as his mentor in the beginning, you know, to Tribe, to Farside, and all the people he's worked with, you know, I know you've been working on it for 5 years, but in terms of pulling all these narratives to create this one narrative in your book, what were some of the hurdles that you found in trying to, you know, I guess, interview people and get these stories, whether it's through the friends, collaborators, even the family members? Because I am sure you, and that's why we kind of want to echo, you did humanize Dilla in this book through the good things that pervade through the story, and also not so much from his own life.
Right.
So yeah, where there's
Well,
yeah, go on.
You know, interweaving the stories is actually the easy part for me, because that's how my brain works. You know, I listen, I don't think I was a great A&R man. I definitely wasn't a great promotion person. I don't always think of myself as the greatest reporter, but one of the things that my mind does is I can take 200 different stories and make them into one. I don't know why, but it's just the way that my mind works. But the reporting part, so much anxiety, so much worry. And, you know, again, how do you get family and friends to talk about Dilla? Time and trust, right? It takes meeting them. It takes, you know, making requests of them. And it takes, sometimes you have to hear no, right? There was, you know, one person in the book, Joylette Hunter, who was at one time James' fiance. When I reached out to her, first thing, I don't want to talk. You know, I'm writing my own book. I said, that's fine. You know, that's great. And I appreciate that. I just want to let you know that because of who you are and because of who he is, I'm probably going to be writing about you in this book. She goes, I know. I said, well, when I finish some passages, I may call you back to read them to you, just to make sure that I'm accurate. And you don't have to say anything. Like, for the people who are reluctant to talk, even Wajid, like, he's a person that I knew actually the best of all the people in Dilla's inner circle, but Wajid was the most reticent to talk. I think partially because he really, a lot of people are very cautious about, this is their friend James, and they've seen him turned into this demigod, you know, that has nothing to do with the man that they knew. And so sometimes I just say, listen, you don't have to say shit. I'm just going to read to you and let me know what you think. So for Wajid, it was like that. But for Joy, at some point, she heard from a couple of other people that I had talked to that, oh, this guy, you know, he isn't on some bullshit. He's actually trying to do the right thing by everybody. You know, I want to do right by Joy. I want to do right by Maureen. It's hard to do. And sometimes they're in conflict. And when they're in conflict, you have to leave the conflict on the page.
Yeah. That's a lot of responsibility, you know.
man. So that's why I'm calling people 2, 3, 4 times just to make sure to get it, that I got it right. It's why I'm calling the Clinton Township Police Department in the middle of last summer, trying to get a police report through the Freedom of Information Act. You know, I don't want to get it wrong. And for the most part, I feel like I succeeded, although I'm so grateful. Actually, one of the wonderful things about the book being released and also social media playing a part in it is that I get information so easily now that I couldn't get before. Like before the book was released. Now everybody knows. And then I got people cut, like somebody hit me from Germany talking about, you know, sort of this story about Dilla and Daft Punk that I didn't know. And somebody hit me with from Toronto who had flyers of the exact dates that Dilla played in Toronto in 2002. You know how I would have killed for that?
Yeah.
When I was making my timeline. So anyway, maybe for the paperback, you know, but yeah, like the reporting was the hardest part, and you just have to, it takes time and you have to earn people's trust. Yeah. And then you have to serve that trust. Like you actually, there's a certain amount when you're a reporter, you fall in love with your sources. There's nothing about the people that I spoke with that is impermanent at this point. Every single one of these people, I feel like I want to know for the rest of my life. Is that crazy?
No, not at all. Not at all.
You know,
yeah.
The amount of care that what you're expressing to us that you've taken with this book, and as possibly for you as a fan, but also someone who cares about his music and him as a person. More, you do it more than others who would probably do a biography, like, you know, Walter Isaacson, you know, on somebody. He's like, whatever.
Although he was good, Steve. I like the Steve Jobs biography.
Yeah, me too. I liked it a lot. But he had, you know, inside knowledge, and Steve picked him. So there's that, you know. But that's what I felt with this book. You told a complete story, even though, you know, you're finding out more stories to tell. So is there, for the legacy of Dilla, and especially what you shared, is there more to tell? And I'm sure there is, but is it going to be you or somebody else?
Well, to be honest, I'll say it this way. One of the critiques of the book, and it is a fair critique, is that it's overly detailed. There's too much in it. And I understand that. But the other side of that is I absolutely had to, one, get it right. Number two, count people. Like literally make sure that they were counted, that they were inscribed, right, in this history. Because as David was saying earlier, hip hop folks, but also a lot of Black artists in general, don't get these kinds of histories, these grand histories with grand ambition. I'm not too humble to say that it was a grand ambition, right, to do it this way. Yeah, because he deserves it. Yeah, every bit as much as Louis Armstrong deserves it, right, or James Brown or Prince, right? So, I would much rather err on the side of having a lot of detail, but trying to make it readable for the novice. Yeah. Than not talk about Dez and Head and all the Detroit folks, to leave out all the craziness that happened with the estate after he died. Right. If I didn't do it, I felt like nobody was going to do it. So when you ask, are there stories left to be told? Yeah, I think there are. I mean, like Jonathan Taylor could go and tell much more of his story, or Joy Lett could tell more of his story, or Maureen could tell more of her story, or Frank. I think Frank's got a book in him, right? All these folks, T3, I think could do something. It's just writing a book is hard. You want to know why? Because you actually got to write it, and I'm not saying it as a diss to anybody. I'm saying it. Yeah, you know, my wife, who I quote often because she's wise, she says, this is her famous saying, everybody got an idea about who's supposed to write a book until it comes time to write it.
Totally.
Oh yeah, somebody should have wrote that. You know, like you gotta write it. It's not about an idea for a book. It's actually words on a page that you gotta write. So
Dan, I think you froze up, Dan.
I think we might have lost him.
Give him a second to get in. While he's doing that, while you're getting back, Dan, David.
Yes, sir.
Dan's been amazing so far. We still got some more to talk to. Hopefully he is get back.
I mean, I've spoken to Dan quite a bit way back in the day. I actually was introduced to him through Oliver Wong when Medium's Q Point started up, which was the music journalism component of Medium, and we've been in contact ever since. But sort of sporadically. But since the book came out and we had him on the podcast, it was really cool to sort of see, sort of not only see his journalistic approach, but to see the reaction to the book as well. Like we were saying earlier, it's like, I think there is a hunger for long form nonfiction journalism. And so it's really good to see that. And, Dilla was a beautiful and complicated person. And Dan really shows both that, but also how Dilla evolved as a musician. So, I mean, I'm really glad this book's getting out there. I hope the paperback sells 1 billion copies as well, and I'm looking forward to that because there might be some extra goodies in that one as well.
I exactly agree with that. And for somebody who is starting to see more of this type of writing and care, or at least interest from publishers, to allow, whether it's university publishers or the larger book entities, having more stories of the subcultures. Oh, what's up?
Did I break the Zoom?
Yeah, you broke. It's all good though. You broke the Zoom on the.
I'm unable to start video for some reason.
Give me one moment, brother. I make you a co-host, then you start it up. But you back, man? We just joss until then. Boom.
Yeah,
broke it. There we go. Talking too much.
So Dan, just before I get into my next question, Lindsay here writes, this is not a question, but I wanted to say, Dan, I am really honored and appreciate the way you write about communities and connections in Dilla Time, as well as the big payback. Hip-hop journalism often writes about figures as lone individuals that pop up out of nowhere, and you help disrupt that narrative.
That's so number one, that's one of the kindest things anybody has ever said about the way that I do my work and also what I write. But I think isn't it more interesting that way? Like instead of the hero narrative, James Yancey, young genius,
Yeah. Totally.
Like, but where would he have been without Frank and Derek by his side? Where we wouldn't even have Runnin' if it weren't for T3. We wouldn't have a Slum Village album if it wasn't for Wajid. We wouldn't even know about Dilla had he not been embraced by first the native tongues and then the folks in the Soulquarians. Everybody has a role and a piece in this. His auntie, it's not just his mom, God bless her. It's his aunties and his uncles. It's his sister Martha, right? Like how close he was to her.
She was there. And that's why it's so important the way you painted this narrative, because everybody helped him. And even in the moments where he felt like nobody was there for him, it was him. Where his human side came out, which is the kind of selfish, jealous side. And you kind of see that, all right, he feels, slighted. So he's going to pull away from others. But I love that about the book, which totally made me love Dilla even more, because he's not this, mythical person anymore. He's like super talented, like hell, but he's
but I think you could even get closer to Dilla if say Frank were to write something about their daily interactions. One of the things that I really wanted to get One of the things I really wanted to get, because people would say, oh man, James was funny. Like Batin had this saying, he's like, sometimes hearing James laugh at a joke was more funny than the joke itself. And, so I would always ask people, tell me something, that James did that was funny. Like I hear he was like super funny. Like, and people had a really hard time remembering individual things except Angie Dewberry, his first long-term girlfriend. I said, what's one thing that James would do that would crack you up? He said, well, when I was in the basement with him and he was behind, the all his stuff was set up on the bar. And she said he would say he'd be behind the bar, and they're in the basement, by the way, and he'd be like, you want something to drink? Wait a minute, I'll go downstairs and I'll get it for you. Like that, like corny ass shit. But like, and that didn't make it into the book because I thought, oh God, maybe that's a little too corny. I don't want to take the God down that much, but
well, that's
what I'm interested in. I'm interested in
totally.
funny James. Like, and I spent, a couple of evenings with him, and didn't, he's very quiet.
Yeah.
So it's hard. It was hard. Like somebody like Frank or Derek would have more of that,
And now you mentioned that there's those kind of stories didn't really get themselves interjected into the book, but was there how much material did not make the book? I'm curious to know, because there's a fair amount already, but what else didn't make the book?
How much bigger could the 400-page book have been? I think there was there was a lot more of Jonathan Taylor's story in there before I cut it, a lot more of Kinder Parker's story. What else? For me, it's more like there were just some questions unanswered. I would have loved to have gotten a little bit more of Egon's story in there. I think I got a fair amount of Common in there. I would have loved to tell the origin stories of almost anybody in that book.
Right.
Like, it's such a fascinating community, and they're still like super emotional and connected to him. Like, Egon is the general manager of Stone's Throw, and he was the good shepherd of J-Lib and Donuts, and even The Shining. He helped out with The Shining in terms of, making sure James had studio time and things like that. And he's been the creative director of the estate for many years, but it's almost, I get surprised at how emotional he gets at certain points, thinking about the man that he knew. Right. I had a chance to hang out with him when I was in LA, and he gave me a ride in his car. And he says, Dilla sat there where you're sitting. Like, wow. Like to even think like that. So people are really, these were his friends. Yeah. Like, it's more than just a business thing. They really, almost inexplicably sometimes loved him.
Yeah. And I mean, those gestures, just like what he did and showed you where James was at, or to when I watch people go to where the MPC, James MPC, where's it at? The African American Museum? Was it in DC? Yeah, hip hop. It's like people stop to pause, and you mentioned that in the book, where it's like a pilgrimage to just see the artifacts.
I had more of Timothy Ann Burnside's story in there too that I had to cut a bit. That was hard to cut because it's really interesting to see how her upbringing made her the kind of person who would bring a drum machine into the Smithsonian. The drum machine of J Dilla, and put it on par with Chuck Berry and Prince and Michael Jackson. That's vision.
Totally. And thankfully people are at the helm to make those decisions. It's like, thankfully.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask, you both, and this, yeah, it's not so much on Dilla's talk about the book, but in terms of just, right now the sharing of information and knowledge, and because of the internet, you know, back in the day, as for collectors like ourselves, if you're
Mhm.
watching ITF battles or DMC battles or mixtapes, everybody hoarded all this information and this the ephemera. But
Mhm.
now, because we can digitize it, and people are now exposed to this history,
Mhm.
what I see with your book, you help in your own way organize that history. Do you think that
Virgo.
yo, yeah, there you go. I'm sure you like the bar as well. Do you think there'll be other kind of and I'm hoping there's other people who be archivists and organizers, historians of this knowledge to help show that there's a definite timeline and influence in that. I don't know if it's a
Yeah.
question. I'm just seeing that there's all this
No, what
content, but
well, it's interesting. There are two sort of heads to archiving. Well, I may not get this right, but you made me think of something. An an archivist is somebody who takes 40 different objects or things and finds the connections and cross references between them.
Mhm.
Um, a storyteller is someone who takes these objects and say, how do they make sense in terms of time? And an archivist does that too, but the storyteller, you're supposed to frame that information as a beginning, a middle, and an end, which is also time, but it's just enough time and not just enough time and not too much time, so that the frame reveals the meaning of the thing that you're examining. So the frame has to reveal. So you're making me think of stuff. See, when I said every interview is different, the frame had to be small enough that we focused on Dilla and his singular innovation,
Mm.
but broad enough in time so that you could compare what he did to what went before it and what came after it, because those are the only ways you can actually make sense of what he did. It wouldn't have made sense to start it when he was born and end it when he died.
Yeah.
That's just biography, but it's
Right.
not enough time for a frame to give the life meaning, just give the story meaning.
I am glad I'm recording this. This is going to be great. This is great. I'm glad I don't know if you came with that focus when you were writing the book, but I'm glad you articulated it in that way.
That just happened now.
Yeah. Yo, fresh, man. As we're just nearing the end of this talk, I want to maybe leave it a more positive question. I mean, they're all positive, but what for yourselves, what was the Dilla production or album or project that when were you, what was it that made you kind of stop and think, like, who is this cat? For
David.
me, yeah, David.
Oh no, go ahead, Danny.
Yeah.
You first.
Oh no, go ahead. You guys go ahead. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I'm 42, so I remember when I first heard "Running" and I was like, "Oh, who's JD?" And then later, as you sort of do the knowledge, and you're like, "Oh, that's a bossa nova sample. Oh my goodness, that's a so and so." So every time I hear that song, to me, that's sort of that reminds me of, like, that's the genesis of when I was like, "Oh fuck, J Dilla." But through the years, I mean, his "Fuck the Police" remix is incredible. I mean, how do you make a hard ass song harder? And we were talking on the podcast. I mean, Dan made a great point on Dad Bod Rap Pod, which was Dilla. His remixes are just fucking incredible. But by saying that, you don't want to be reductive. Like, he's not just like a hip hop remixer. You know what I mean? He has a transcendent ability in his music, but his remixes, man, are fucking incredible. And I feel like every few years I'm still like, oh shit, here's this Dilla remix I've never heard of, and they're always kind of mind blowing. So that would sort of That would be my answer to that question.
What about you, Danny?
I would definitely say when when I was such a native tongues, especially tribe head. So when Beats Rhyme and Life came out, and took a notice to the production that was really different, but couldn't figure out why. But once again, was the song that got me, and it was just deep, emotive. It's just because I was a kid. I was a shy, kid. I'm 40, so I'm 2 years younger than David. But I watched my older cousins in the 90s going out, starter jackets out and about. But they had these tapes lying around, and I would just swipe them to go listen to, hip hop because I couldn't buy it for myself. But Beats Rhyme is Live because I wanted to understand why this was different from all the other Tribe production, but also didn't know why it pulled me in as deep as it did. So yeah, it was definitely that album.
That's incredible. I have never heard anybody say that Once Again was their entry point to Dilla. That's unique.
Yeah. I wouldn't, I don't know, but that was it. Yeah.
I think for me, like a lot of other folks, because I'm 54, my entry point was Runnin', which I loved, but I think the sort of refocusing moments for me, like, you understand that there are producers out there and they're doing their thing, and yeah, you like them, but now that moment, it was either, and it might have been both, the Sometimes remix, Brand New Heavies, or Find a Way by Tribe, because Find a Way was such a monster of a beat. The lows of that kick drum, the offness of the shaker, the bizarreness of the sample. It's just an absolutely insane production. Who does that? JD does that. I think that was it for me, like 98. And very shortly thereafter, we started to hear, Slum Village stuff and Common stuff. So yeah.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing that, guys. As we kind of wrap up things, any last words, kind of shout outs, or even plugs for stuff that's coming out for y'all? Because I know you both have some things, or just even rest. What do you plan on doing in this still pandemic world? So
I'm hoping to get some dinner after this, and a nice 7 hours if possible. But in terms of projects, I have a couple things I'm working on. I actually just wrote the liner notes to a Vinyl Me Please reissue of Lab Cabin. So it's funny we're talking about running and stuff.
Wow, I want to read that, man.
Oh, cool, man. Hearing that from you, man, means the world. But that
No,
was
man,
awesome.
but you wrote the Wax Poetics article that you wrote, on Slum, I believe, was super important. Right?
I don't believe I wrote one on Slum. No.
What did you write? No, what was your piece in Wax Poetics?
I've done a bunch. I think the most recent one I did the cover story for Making of a Hard to Earn with Gangstar on the cover.
That's right. That's right.
But yeah, I mean, so I'm working on a couple things for Wax Poetics too. I just interviewed Miss Pat, reggae's matriarch, a little Chinese Jamaican lady. The owner of VP Records, and they ended up buying Green Sleeves, and her whole history is just fascinating. So I have those two things I'm working on that's coming out, and I spoke to Chad Hugo earlier in the week, and that's going to be for the Grammys website, and that was really cool to talk to him too. Because
did you read Jeff Mao's piece?
I did. I actually
the GQ
it came out like a day before I spoke to Chad, so I really used that as sort of a template to dive in at certain entry points.
But I gotta ask, now that you've re-examined Lab Cabin and you wrote the liner notes for it, did you see anything now in retrospect? Sort of what was sort of the organizing principle for you, listening to that again?
Well, I think just diving into the music itself again is just just giving yourself time to enjoy it again, in a different gaze as a 42-year-old. But I just didn't know that there was just so much instability and chaos while that was being made. You know what I mean? Both within the crew and just from a business standpoint. And but then when you see the video, what's that video that drop when they do the backwards video? It's like incredible. But the turmoil that surrounded that shoot was crazy. So just things like that, I just felt were insanely interesting. And so
yeah. So adding more context to that time period. I mean,
yeah, 100%. Because it's that album is sort of a darker album than Bizarre Ride, right? It's like
it's their second album and also their last album.
Totally. But I think my takeaway is I loved Bizarre Ride like to death, but upon re-listening, I kind of might pick Lab Cabin if I had to go between the two. Wow. I know. I told some people that and they're like, what the fuck, man? But I just really
it's all right. It's all right. You know, we change, right? As we get older, our aesthetics change, the things that hold our attention change. That's why I don't, like all these folks with Kendrick isn't what he was. Like, Kendrick is who he is right now.
Right.
Like,
exactly.
We have the gift of hearing him in all his imperfections in the full flower of his capabilities right now. F what you think he should be doing.
Right.
Totally.
But again, that's not the A&R person from the 90s speaking. That's the older journalist person speaking.
Right. We're not pivoting to sales right now. But I wish they dropped some physicals because it's hard to find anything right now.
Yeah.
I'm kind of mad there's nothing out, but it's all good. Yeah. Well, Dan, I know you got a lot in store in the future, especially rest for yourself. So I do hope that we get to talk again on the next project. David, thank you for jumping in on this and sharing your insight and wisdom as well.
Can I say something though before we go?
Yeah, bro.
You're the coolest librarian I've ever met. Bar none. I'm telling you, librarians,
bro. Thank you, man.
All right. Represent.
I'm trying, man. I am definitely trying. There's a few of us out there that I'm looking at the conferences. I'm like, we should start up our own little thing because it's the typical fare, but we understand that these books are coming in and we want them in the stacks. And this knowledge, eventually, if the next decades or whatever, I hope we do document and make a library of this and make sure that people know that this is important. This is changing the trajectory of culture. So don't front like you don't know.
I'm saying, I said coolest librarian ever? I stand by that.
All right. Well, everybody, thank you for joining us. Be safe out there. We'll catch you on the next one, but support your library, support authors, buy the books, and support good journalism because it's honest and truthful when it is. All right, y'all. Peace. Take care. Thanks, Dan. Thanks, David.
Peace.
Hey, good to see you again, Dan.
Yeah, good to see you too, man.
Yeah, have a good one, man. We'll be in touch, man. Let me know